speaking about progressions to games, we had another game release a bunch of stuff this week, and I would be remiss if we didn't talk about things like that. The new Aragorn, which, okay, so I'm gonna preface this a little bit with, like, I understand the desire for changing this kind of stuff. I understand it, but I think it's stupid. I think it's amateurish. I think it diminishes both the idea of what Tolkien wrote and the heart behind saying, like, we want more representation, which I can understand from a certain perspective, but to take what's already been done and change it completely and not even give it a rhyme or a reason, because I don't know if you knew, see, I think I have it on here, is Éomer and Éowyn are completely different races in this game now. I don't know if you can see that. She's black and he's white. He's like Viking and she's something. It's yeah, and it's really odd. So it doesn't even make sense.
She has white hair?
She has white hair, yeah.
She looks like Storm from the X-Men.
She does. Storm with braids. Yeah, she does. And obviously, anytime you criticize this, the first thing they say is racist. This is all that's all the only reason that you might have for this here. And my point has always been, like, look, if you're going to do that, make it at least logical. Like, give it reasoning that we can say, okay, I understand how this works. But when it doesn't even work, when it's downtown LA represented in Middle Earth, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Can we go back to the Enderil card for a minute? So my biggest problem with this card is that to me looks 0% like Anduril.
Anduril, it does. It has the gem.
I was thinking
like that is the most generic fantasy sword that I've ever seen.
It almost looks electronic.
Yeah.
Like the Jimon Hansu look for Aragorn.
That's who it is. You're right.
I love Jimon Hansu. Like that would be, if we're gonna do this, like you said, that would be really cool casting to do like an Aragorn, and we could put some lore into it, and like the Númenóreans have this sort of darker blood because maybe they've got like Polynesian.
You could do it for sure.
Like you're in the middle of the ocean. That would be really cool to do. But we don't have any other races that this is being done to. Like that's what irritates me is, like, I teach at a predominantly Hispanic school. We've got no Hispanic representation in the fantasy world, like none. Like, can you guys think of a single like Latin character in a fantasy universe? So Michelle Rodriguez did a killer job in the new Dungeons and Dragons movie, but I can't think of another.
Probably example. Like the first thing I would think of is like the people of Dorne in Game of Thrones, maybe. But I mean, that's it's like a pretty obscure example.
No, I could see that. Yeah, because that was like, wasn't that Dorne? That was that the guy who plays the Mandalorian? Was he a Dornish?
It was Homeboy, yeah.
And was Dr. Bashir from Star Trek Deep Space Nine in that
his
too?
Name? He's in Last of Us too.
Yeah.
Would Pedro Pascal not be like a killer Aragorn? Would he not be the best?
Oh,
he'd be great.
See that.
Yeah, he'd be fantastic. Yeah.
And think about, like, in terms of like cultural cachet, like Spanish speaking peoples, you've got this mixed legacy of like they've got a lot of like really beautiful things, but they've also got this sort of like conquistador past of like imperialism. So there's this mix between the Númenórean legacy of like making really great cultural artifacts while also sometimes like oppressing other people. It all sort of plays into your own cultural resonance. If we're gonna do it, then like if we're going to go whole hog on like on diversity and on like racial equity in card games and stuff, then actually do it. And let's.
That's always my point. You know, my main concern is that the morals and the philosophies of Tolkien shine through in whatever project is coming forth. So when it comes to diversity on any project, my thing has always been, like you and Jonathan have just said, make it logical. Like, make me believe the story, make it make sense within the story, have people who are supposed to be in the same family look similar. I mean, it's pretty basic, low effort stuff that you can do. And having a brother and sister, you know, look totally completely different, like Éomer and Éowyn. It just seems lazy, you know, hastily thrown together.
You know, I think though that this idea that you have this lore, this mythology that Tolkien basically drew from. He drew from Europe, from Northern Europe, from the British Isles and everything else. And we want to share that. We want that to people to the idea that a person cannot have commonality with these characters, can't identify with these archetypes in Lord of the Rings unless they have the same color of skin as them, just seems so unbelievably shallow to me. And also the idea that somehow people with a different skin color, whether they're black or Hispanic or whatnot, are unable to create their own worlds and their own stories that are unique to them. Both of those two things to me, I look at this and it's just kind of a tokenism. I think we made that pun last time, but it's like a tokenism where it's like, okay, yeah, we basically put Aragorn in blackface, and if you say there's something wrong with that, you're the racist. And I just find it to be so inverted, such a horrible way to go about it.
I think the implication too is when you see it, and again, I applaud the effort and where people are coming from with things like that, but it's almost implied because we have the description of Aragorn from Tolkien himself, right? It's written there in the book, what he looked like. So the desire to change it almost implies that it's not good enough the way it is. Does that make sense?
Well, they believe that. They believe it's not good enough because it's not representative enough.
So here's the thing. This is one of the things that I appreciated about. Don't flame me. This is one of the things that I appreciated about when Rings of Power was doing
careful.
The system.
You're not allowed to bring up that show, which will not be named here.
So
I'm joking.
They actually went to the texts and they pulled out lines that talked about how Harfoots had darker skin color. I mean, if you look at the first few pages of The Hobbit, where Tolkien is describing hobbits, what does he say? They have dark curly hair, and he says they have brown fingers, right? And I don't know what that means. I guess because have they been in dirt? I don't know. But like he's talking about hobbit skin tone. So if you want representation, you've got the text where it says hobbits can have darker tones of skin. So there it is in the text. It makes sense. Just make hobbit culture black.
But the problem
with that is like you had I'd be fine with that. Just make them all look the same, So when I'm watching it, my brain isn't going, that's not right. These people are all members of like what's supposed to be a homogenous group. So I wish they would all look that way as opposed to, having somebody who's a cousin.
It would be the equivalent of saying, all right, we're going to take this Maori tribe from New Zealand, and then we're going to add some Scots. We're going to add some Nigerians. We're going to add some Mongolians. We're going to add some Thai. Right? It doesn't make any sense because it'll look all different. You can't say they're Maori anymore because they don't fit the role any longer.
That's exactly the point I was making.
Like, why would you do that?
Think about how boss it would have been to say, like, to base the Númenóreans off of the Maori, off of like New Zealand culture. Like, how many levels would that work on? That would be so cool.
And at least they would have said, you know what, I don't really like what you did, but I can get on board with that because you're making it make sense in a way within that story that you're telling, rather than it obviously being a play. And that's the problem too, is that when they make these
the Rock
moves,
as Aragorn,
that when they make these plays, right, immediately like you start thinking like, well now we have you chose that person because of their skin color, not because of any other reason. And to our own detriment, we might be thinking that, but that's what ultimately ends up happening if you're saying, I am going to, since our biggest value is diversity, equity, inclusion, and making it a representation of the modern world, then we start judging it because you made those decisions rather than I'm going to create the best show possible or create the best game possible or create the best card game possible.
Tolkien talked a lot too about the virtues of making sure that your reader is grounded in a story. And when you have these things, like I said, a small homogenous tribe of people who look completely different from one another, that's one of those things. It's like it tickles your brain and goes, this doesn't seem consistent, based off of all logic that I know. But okay, let's go with it. And
Mhm.
I think that the Rings of Power could have been so much better if they had just chosen how they wanted the Harfoots to look.
So here's you guys told me I needed to bring it in terms of scholarship. So here's my first contribution. Tolkien's famous quote about having removed all explicit reference to religion in The Lord of the Rings. He says it's instead subsumed into the metaphysics of the story. The reason why he does that is because of his philosophy of subcreation, right? And that's the reason why he finds the King Arthur myth distasteful, is because it mixes elements of the primary world into your little subcreative reality. So think like you have like a little bonsai tree or like a little doll house. And I've seen some incredibly intricate doll houses. You could do like little miniature photography and you could stage a scene. If you're looking at that photograph, if you're inside that, you can imagine that this is real. But when the cat photobombs the picture, all of a sudden you realize that the scale is not true to life, right? All of a sudden this is now fake. This is an imitation of reality. And therefore its infelicities, its inadequacies are going to become really evident. And it takes you out. That's Tolkien's problem. And so that's exactly what happens in this new trend of casting. And it's not just with the Tolkien works, it's with anything. I want to give actors of color their shots. Like that's not the problem. The problem is, like we said, subsuming the quality of the art underneath different concerns. And so if you have it be consistent, and if we want to make all of the Harfoots have dark skin and all of the Númenóreans be Maori or something like that, it makes sense based on the lore. It does not take you out of the story. There is a way to get your DEI quota while also making sure that that's not interrupting the flow of the story. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
If you want to do that, you can do both. You can. You just have to do it well. And so I just don't understand the decisions that are being made. Like, I mean, I understand why people are motivated to do this, but I don't understand why they don't want to do it well.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I look at, like, again, the idea that you have to kind of cannibalize Tolkien to do it. You know, like, why can there not be stories unique to cultures that fill that quota, so to speak? You know, why do we have to take something that was written in the middle of the 20th century that's referring back to ancient, European mythology and languages, and then say, in order for us to have, true, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to take this work and then bring it up to where we think it should be now? My question is, we've got incredible, writers of all races. We have incredible directors and actors and actresses, and all of these people. Create your own stories, create your own games, create your own cards, like, and create them in a way where you're creating a whole new world. Like, why must you take something that, and I think part of it is because, like I've said before, this is, the Lord of the Rings really in particular is kind of the capstone of the Western canon. It incorporates Tolkien's full metaphysics and cosmology, and draws from every discipline of literary art, and draws from every religious energy that he can put into it in a subcreative kind of way. It all hangs together, and it's I think one of the things that I read last year, I read Rod Dreher's book, A Live Not by Lies, and he talks about, I forget the name of the family, but when they were under communist rule and they didn't have Bibles as a family, they read the Lord of the Rings to remind them what evil was, right? And so, and it's how one of the ways they survived that period of time. And I think you have in Tolkien's work this universal good that people want to essentially kind of fragment and weaken and take its meaning away from. And I think this is one of the ways you do it.